Mary Alice Smith will share the history of the Morrison families from the early 1800s to present day. I have a little bit of a connection to this story, as when I did the cemetery tours, one of the Morrisos was on the tour as the oldest inhabitant in our cemetery. So without further ado, I'd like to please welcome Mary Alice Smith.
Bonjour, Kanamaganatuk. Greetings, all my relatives. Wasegi Shikokendago, Makwanto Dem. My Anishinaabe name is Bright Sky Woman, and I'm of the Bear Clan. My English name is Mary Alice, and I'm originally from Thunder Bay, Longbow Lake, Da Nogam. So I live at Longbow Lake now. I've been there for almost 30 years. The Creator is the lake, and we are the waves on the lake. This was a teaching that the late Tabasanequit Canoe, also known to some as Peter Kelly, of Treaty 3, a teaching from his father about Lake of the Woods. Heading the 16-foot Starcraft out across the Little Traverse from French Narrows, Joseph nodded toward the ocean of the Big Traverse to the west and hesitated. Watching the waves, checking the wind, and a changing sky, he alerted me that once we got out into the open water, there was no turning back until we arrived at his birthplace, Nyangashing, also known as Sand Point, on the southern tip of the Alno Peninsula. And, which you can see, it's not,
Try pointing it at the computer and not
thank you. No, I'm trying to use the red thing. So, Nyangashing is just, over here, right here, at the south tip of the Alno Peninsula, and that's where we were heading. We had already put out our sema, tobacco, at home before we left, and at a sacred site like this one, on Kabapikatawangang, the Anishinaabe name for Lake of the Woods, with prayers for safe travel. So far, on the hours-long journey, the shoreline had only been a few minutes away across small stretches of calm water like this. My late husband, Joseph Morrison, the family also known as Morriseaus, knew and respected the mysteries of the lake. His ancestors, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, and the half-breed Morriseaus were born and had died there for generations. The Anishinaabe, this is a picture of the McPherson, one of the McPhersons who married one of the Morriseaus, Sophie Morrisseau. The Anishinaabe had begun to call Kabapikatawangang, Lake of the Woods, home 700 years ago. Their long migration from the east coast, starting in 900 AD, followed prophecies that kept them moving east along the St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes, to Lake of the Woods, and beyond to the Rocky Mountains. Those who settled in what is now known as the Boundary Waters, where Manoman, wild rice, flourishes, had been told in ceremony as part of this journey that they would recognize their new homeland when they reached the place where food grows on the water. These were not a people to be here's a picture of people wild rice picking. These were not a people to be taken lightly, one European visitor reported back to the British in the 18th century. The Ojibwe had gained control of the region after their own 100-year war with the Sioux. A prosperous, proud, and fiercely independent people, they traveled and traded along the Mississippi as far south as the Gulf of Mexico and north to the Hudson Bay, living by complex spiritual laws. and systems evolved over thousands of years. The Morriseaus, and here's a picture of 3 of the Morriseau brothers, or the one on the left is Jonathan Morriseau, who is the one that is buried here at the Lake of the Woods Cemetery, who lived to be 109 years old, and his son. And then on the right is Joseph's great-great-grandfather, Michel Morrisseau, who is Jonathan's brother. The Morrisseaus were part of another great migration to a new world on Turtle Island. In search of a better life, they arrived in Quebec from France in the 1600s. A few made their way further west, forming alliances with indigenous people through trade and by marriage. All the Morrisseaus were great traverse men, concluded Jonathan Morrisseau's obituary in 1937. He is described as knowing Lake of the Woods as few others knew it, having paddled its rippling waters for many years, coming to know and love the quiet waterways and the thousands of islands. He and his brother Jacob and Michel came to the southern shores of the lake as mixed blood fur traders, messengers, and boatsmen with the Hudson Bay Company, referred to as Wissahickto-Weyveneh by the Anishinaabe and half-breeds by the English and Métis by the French. The 3 brothers all married Anishinaabe woman of Gababikatawangang, Lake of the Woods, and stayed. The 1880s diary of Dr. Ernest Brown of Minnesota describes Joseph's great-great-grandfather, Michel, in quotes. Old Michel Morrison, after 15 years of dog sled travel via Northwest Angle, carrying the mail between Fort Francis and the one house that was then Rat Portage, not to mention 8 years' service with the Hudson Bay Company, had his residence at the mouth of the Rainy River. And this is an old photograph of the post, the Hudson Bay post, at what was called Hungry Hall at the mouth of the Rainy River at the south end of the lake. Anishinaabe and Métis people were the lifeblood of the fur trade. For 2 centuries, most European traders married indigenous women. Their children became native-born and are described by historian Litwin as possessing valued skills such as canoe building, guiding, and interpreting, obtained from parents who were well-versed in obtaining a livelihood from the land. Joseph's family is just one branch among hundreds on the Morriseau-Morrison family tree, leafed with names like Beecham, Boucher, Copeness, Godden, Linklater, McPherson, Moore, O'Connor, Oshie, Rickleff, Sweeney, Triscoll, and Wheeler, to name a few. That first time we crossed the Little Traverse toward the homeland of 5 generations of Morrisseaus and hundreds of other Anishinaabe and mixed blood families, it seemed otherworldly to me. The sand beaches changed color from tan to red to tropical white from one shore to the next. Oak trees grew among the white and red pines. The waters stretched out like a liquid prairie under a measureless sky. The rocks seemed to give off their own light. My journey to this striking place started long before I met the Morrison Morrisseaus. As a 14-year-old, I had already found my way to the Thunder Bay Indian Youth Friendship Center, where I immediately knew I belonged. I sensed my chances of surviving, healing, and enjoying life were better there than where I had been. I felt a kinship with the other young people at the center, though I had grown up with no real understanding of how we might be related, other than the visible half-breed features of my father and his siblings. My grandmother had little knowledge of her birth family, the Scottish Cree Hunter-Ludits of the Albany River. At the Friendship Center, I soaked in the easy laughter and teasing. Hearing them speak their own languages sounded familiar and comforting. It was there I began to learn how to get along in life, where I first met and listened to elders, crafted my first leather fringe dress, and was awed at my first powwow. I was told that my voice mattered. I was part of a community. I had gifts and responsibilities. When I met Joe more than a decade later, I was even more determined to travel, however far I had to learn to live Mino Bimadzuin, a good way of life. With him, I found an ever-growing circle of family and friends around the lake and the Lake of the Woods Drum. These are Joe's late parents, Ada and Don Morrison. Joe seemed an icon of all that I wanted to be. Proud of who he was, respectful, kind, smart, funny, handsome, and a great dancer to boot. His family and friends welcomed me, and my desire to be part of their way of life became even stronger. The Morrison men and women I came to know best, I'm going to put that back there, Don and Ada, inherited their ancestors' knowledge and respect for the lake and the ways of the Anishinaabe people. But it was not a simple or an easy life. My in-laws had traversed across worlds not imagined by their grandparents to get where they were when I met them in the early 1980s. Both of Joseph's parents lost their mothers as young children. My mother-in-law, Ada Crow Nakwe Gijagok, helped to raise her brothers and sisters when her mother died. She remembered her grandmother sending her and her younger brother out across the lake for the day by themselves, without food, in the middle of winter. Ada felt only the harshness of it at the time, but realized later they were being taught to survive. She remembered, too, the glory days of the Anishinaabe, before the gatherings and ceremonies were outlawed, when she was a small girl among 1,000 people camping together near the Big Traverse in the 1920s. It was probably similar to what was reported as the Indian Scare of 1900 in the headlines in the newspaper here. When, in quotes, when Jonathan Morrisseaus, the lighthouse keeper on the Big Traverse near Big Island, spotted 200 canoes filled with Indians dressed up in war paint and feathers, the alarm went out. So off went a delegation of prominent white men to investigate, who discovered that the Indians were just having a picnic. It was more than a picnic. Ada recalled hundreds of families camping together for weeks at midsummer, picking blueberries and fishing during the day, feasting, gaming, and dancing in the evening. Ceremonies were held. Marriages were arranged. Gradually, people would go their own way in family groups to pick minomen, wild rice, and by early fall, they would head to their own closely knit winter sites. Ada also recalled, as a girl, the day-long trip by boat to Kenora to shop, leaving their craft at Anishinaabe Park, changing into their best clothes, bringing a lunch, as they were not allowed into the town's restaurants. They got their drinking water from the horse troughs on Main Street. Joseph and his parents, like over 150,000 other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children across the country, traversed for years in the cold and sometimes dangerous waters of residential school. Not yet 10 years old when his mother Shawan died, my father-in-law Don, who was born Danielle Morriseaus, was sent to Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in Kenora. His all-too-French name was changed to Donald Morrison, and he had to quickly learn English. He played hockey and the trumpet. This is a picture of him in the school band, and competed in tournaments and band trips. It was at Cecilia Jeffrey that he met saxophone player Ada Crow Nakwe Gijagok. They soon married, and back at Sandpoint at Nyangashing, their only child, Joseph, was born in 1941. On one of our camping trips to the old settlement site on the Alno Peninsula, Joe showed me where cabins had lined the ridge above the sand beach. There, as an infant, he had fallen gravely ill with fever. His parents, fearing he might die, I'm going to move that back. Sent for a doctor from the mainland. While they waited, a respected healer came to see them, giving Joseph the name Bekwekanang, meaning someone who is turned back or turned around from where they were going. He recovered and lived another 70 years. Not long after Joe's turnaround, his father and scores of other young Anishinaabe men of Treaty 3 left their families to serve in World War II, making the return voyage the Morriseaus had made centuries before, back across the Atlantic, landing at Normandy. Within months, Don returned home wounded by a sniper. The journey back to his family would take much longer. For almost 20 years, he battled with alcohol on the streets of Kenora. Returning to his Anishinaabe teachings gave him the strength to finally give it up. The Morning Star Detox Center in Kenora was named after Don, Gijaganang, which means Morning Star, in honor of the decades he spent helping others find sobriety and Minoba Madzawin, the good life. During Don's lost years, Ada, already crippled by severe rheumatoid arthritis, came down with tuberculosis and was sent to quarantine at the sanatorium in Fort William, forcing her to put 6-year-old Joseph into Cecilia Jeffrey for 2 years. Upon her return, she went on to become a social worker, and with her good friend Catherine Everson, one of the first Native court workers in Kenora. By the time I joined their circle, Don, Ada, and Joe were fully reunited, dedicated to family life and reclaiming their traditions. Gifted to him in a dream, Don made a grandfather drum, Wakabenes. There's a picture of it on the right. Bending the wood into shape, stretching and painting the hide, carving the wooden staffs and stand to cradle the drum, fixing the eagle feathers and bells in place. Ada sewed the red velvet covering and the carrying case for the staffs. They made powwow regalia for Joseph, his children and grandchildren, carried songs and shared them on the powwow trail all around Gababikataungung, Lake of the Woods. They invested in things that would keep them close to the lake and the people, a 16-foot starcraft, a bright red fiberglass canoe they used for picking minoman, wild rice, and a pop-up camper that could sleep 8 of us. Almost every weekend, we packed up our vehicles with Wakabenes, the drum, our outfits, kids, and camping gear, and headed to a gathering to celebrate the good life. There's a picture of the red canoe when it was brand new, and I still have it at home, and a picture of Joseph with just a few of the grandchildren. Writing this story now, with all these memories, a year into the isolation of the COVID pandemic, I felt lost for a while, wandering in the past, unmoored, digging through boxes of papers and maps and photos. And I came across this account written in 1870 by a scout for the Wolseley expedition. He described the scene at Hungry Hall near the south shore of the Big Traverse, where the Morriseaus lived. So here's this description. About 5 miles from the mouth of the Rainy River, there was a small outstation of the Hudson Bay Company kept by a brother of my boatman, Morriseau, Jonathan Morriseau. As we approached this little post, it was announced to us by an Indian that Morriseau had that morning lost a child. When the boat touched the shore, the father of the dead child came out of the hut and shook hands with everyone in solemn silence. When he came to his brother, he kissed him, and the brother in his turn went up the bank and kissed a number of Indian women who were standing around. There was not a word spoken by anyone. After a while, they remained some time inside. In its way, I don't ever recollect seeing a more solemn exhibition of grief than this complete silence in the presence of death. End of quote. As I came to know and love the Morriseau family, I too mourned with others each loss, especially the deaths of Don and Ada, followed by Joseph. Ada told me once that when she was 19, bedridden for months in the hospital, crippled with arthritis, her doctor came to visit and told her she had a choice. She could get up and keep moving, even though she was in agonizing pain, or she could stay there and never get out of bed. So she got up and kept moving until she was 88. My mother-in-law never dwelled on sad or painful memories. The loss of her siblings and her parents, the humiliations of residential school, or the time her arthritis caused her to fall on Main Street and no one stopped to help her up. She would share trials like this in one breath and in the next say, "But that was in the past." So today, I do my best to live in the moment on a familiar and comforting shore at Longbow Lake, surrounded by all the sacred things they left behind. The sky blue jingle dress Ada hemmed for me, beaded moccasins of home-tanned hide she made to go with it, a dream catcher over our bed, a baby blanket she crocheted tucked away in the closet, an Anishinaabe women's stick game on a shelf with instructions on how to play and keep the score. The red stone pipe and eagle tail fan that Joe crafted for me, the carved oak drawers of his grandmother's sewing machine that he rescued from Neongashing at Sand Point, the remnants of rice harvesting, the faded red canoe, the cedar knocking sticks that Don carved, the birch bark winnowing basket. They're hard-earned treasures. The greatest of these is a large and loving family, and these are just a few of the family. I'd say maybe, I don't know, a tenth maybe, Bev? A large and loving family centered around Wakabanas, our grandfather drum, and a stream of memories emptying into a boundless lake. I can picture a time not far off finding my way back down to Neongashing, to Sand Point, with new generations of Morrisons creating new memories, spending the day swimming and gathering driftwood on the shining sand beach at Big Island, looking west out over the Big Traverse, knowing the other side is there, even though we cannot see it. Miigwech.